So the question that even probably the layman is asking is that, yes, there is increased testing and this is probably being reflected in an increased incidence of cases, but what are the other statistical metrics that we need to look at to say, despite an increasing incidence of cases, the pandemic is still under control?
In this manner, I think while the number of, that's a good point. When the number of cases are going, how can we say that we are under control? That's counterintuitive. So if you look at compounding interest or the way exponential growth occurs, from 100 to becoming 200 is different from 1 becoming 2. Once it is 100, we feel like, oh my God. So look at the number. Then 1 lakh becoming 2 lakh is even appearing at the same, I mean, even more astonished. But that rate has changed. It has decelerated. The R0 has gone down. The doubling time is increased. So therefore, you're bound to see more number of cases, but reduced rate of transmission and increased doubling time, which is very good indicator. But it is again wrong to look only at the national level and then be happy about it. We should be looking at state level and even sub-state level to make sure that we don't miss any foci of transmission.
So I follow you on Twitter, and there was a very interesting tweet that you had retweeted, and this was the talk about the number of tests per confirmed case. And they say that when the test per confirmed case, which is the inverse of test positivity, is high, then even if your numbers are absolute numbers of cases are increasing, you're still doing under control. So what are your thoughts on that? Should we, rather than look at test positivity, start looking at the number of tests which is per confirmed case? As we know, Kerala and Karnataka, the test per confirmed case is more than 50, whereas in some other state, it is still low.
I think, Nitin, a combination of both testing numbers and test positivity is important. And coupling with case fatality, even better would be death per million. So if you look at these 3 indicators, testing numbers, test positivity, and death per million, if you're able to combine all these 3 and then make a qualitative assessment, I'll give you an example. Let's assume a scenario where there is high prevalence of infection. So let's assume 50 of 100 people are infected. Now you're doing a test. Even if your testing is very few, you just tested 5 people. Randomly, there is a chance that you'll pick 50% of the infections. So your test positivity is really high. So background prevalence is really important in terms of your test positivity. That's the point you must have seen on Twitter also. Coupled with, so if your test positivity is high, but if your testing numbers are low, I'll be scared, because the test positivity is high probably because you have high prevalence, but you're not testing enough. So therefore you're missing areas of transmission. So therefore, these are very simple epidemiological observations. You don't require rocket science, you don't require models. And these are the simple measures. And death per million, absolutely simple estimation. By looking at these, we should be able to focus. And I believe these kind of analysis should be at the state level, district level. For me, hotspot is as important as a silent area. If you have not reported a single case so far, is it because you have missed it or there is no infection? So that also has to be looked into.
So coming to your point of deaths per million, so we know that India has a 3.01 case fatality rate as of today. But when we look at deeper and look at the deaths per million, the deaths in India is just 2.49 deaths per million. Whereas again, I know it's unfair to make that comparison, but USA has 282.59 deaths per million, UK 525.9 per million, and even New Zealand seem to have more than us at 4.36 deaths per million. So my question to you is that, do you also believe that in some sense there is underreporting of death in India and it may not be the most accurate? Or is the mortality difference between India and other countries due to other factors?
So now when you look at deaths per million, you have to assume what was the background death per million and then see what is the excess that is resulted because of the COVID. Now, we are all aware that the death itself might be underreported. This is the assumption. But I contest that. Births may be underreported, but if it is anything that is in terms of inheritance or anything that you want to do, the first thing a family wants to do is get a death certificate. So for getting a death certificate, there is registration in the country. So therefore, you cannot simply assume, I mean, not you, general, when people say there is underreporting of deaths, people don't report deaths. I do not really agree with that assessment, because anything can be underreported, but not death, because death is a major event, even by a health system's yardstick. However, the quality of death reporting can improve. That I agree. In terms of the classification of what the cause of death and things like that. So therefore, when you look at death per million, even 1 to 2 death per million in India, if that's the average at which COVID-19 is affecting, then you'll have to prioritize areas which are higher than this. So we just need to concentrate in the time period that we are observing instead of observing before. If you want to observe, compare it with before, then it has to be excess death. Or if it is just in this time, you have to compare with what is the national average and which regions have higher than this, and prioritize your actions based on that.
So considering we have learned about the disease much better than what we had 2 months back, going forward, what would your recommendation be, sir? Would it be that we do increased testing and scale up testing in form of RT-PCR? Or what is your opinion on having zero prevalence testing? And just to touch upon the very interesting point you brought about, even for example, like what was being followed in the polio surveillance strategy of trying to look for acute flaccid paralysis, would you be worried if there are areas which are not reporting any influenza-like illnesses and would try to focus your attention on that?
All brilliant questions, Nitin. So number one, what kind of strategies that we are going to do? In terms of surveillance, ILI surveillance and SARI surveillance has to be strengthened in every part of the country. There's no doubt about it. So we should be reviewing in terms of how well the surveillance is conducted. Instead of asking for what is the number of cases, we should be asking, how are you reporting? So in Karnataka, actually, that's already happening. Few other states like Andhra Pradesh have done it really well. So we are on the path, but all states will have to do this. Number two, we should increase testing. And there is going to be zero surveillance survey, which has already started. In Karnataka itself, there are 2 districts which ICMR has done it. And the results will be announced sometime towards the end of next week or so. Then there is also a facility-based surveillance which is going to come. So, and there are all the rapid tests that are going to come. I keep saying in a lighter way that we'll have more tests than what we need very soon. And as a country, we have been obsessed with the kind of test strategy. I would feel like you rightly pointed out, looking at surveillance as the measure and then adding testing as another layer. So in terms of Bayesian way of looking at things, you know who is probable and then you're testing it. So your posterior probability will be much higher by going through a scientific approach rather than randomly testing people, which will not get us anywhere. We will be randomly testing and feel that, okay, we are safe, and we'll be missing obvious clusters of infection if we don't follow the syndromic approach. So I think, again, India is the leader here in terms of implementing a syndromic surveillance approach coupled with testing. I've been saying this from the beginning. I think this is the way forward. And I'm very happy that few states have done it really well.
So just to summarize what you're saying, we have a syndromic surveillance for severe acute respiratory infection or influenza-like illness. We test those whom we deem probable to be infected. And what would your mode of testing be, sir? Because there's a lot of hue and cry in scientific literature about antibody testing. You have multiple seroprevalence studies coming in from Geneva, Spain, USA and all, stating that anywhere between 2% to 15% of the population is infected based on the antibody levels. Do you think that's a right assumption to make, that when you're finding antibody titers to be high, you're saying that the prevalence of the infection in the community is actually more?
Yeah, so first thing first, which test do we prefer? It depends on what our objective is. If the objective is to make a diagnosis of COVID-19, it is nothing else RT-PCR. And this will continue as the mainstay of testing. Coming to serology, even as of today, WHO has no position in terms of which test is better and what does it say. So there's a lot of ambiguity around these testing. However, having said that, this is the way to go. We will validate these tests. We will validate in terms of what kind of sensitivity and specificity they have. And it will tell us what proportion of people are getting infected in the community. And once those results are known, and we don't have to wait for long, within a matter of 10 days, we will know which region in this country has what kind of seroprevalence. Based on that, whatever we are discussing today can completely change.
Tune into our next episode to know, is there any role of quarantine as we move further once lockdown is completely relaxed? And also, does herd immunity exist as a concept?